going on, friends? How is everybody? Happy Monday. I'm so excited to be here as usual. This is one of my favorite times in the week, and I'm really excited to have this conversation tonight. I want to welcome everyone. Hola. We're here to always talk about something mental health, disability, or trauma related to create conversations, acceptance, and opportunities. I always give my trigger warning. Sometimes we have discussions that may be difficult or mature. These are our experiences, but I feel that lots of people can benefit from these conversations, and maybe we can save a life and bring a better quality. So we're here to kick off another week. I'm excited. Thank you so much. Visual descriptor. I'm a female Latina brunette with silver streaks, olive skin, brown eyes, and a big smile. And today I'm wearing a new lipstick. And we can talk about makeup, but I've been going no plastic, and I took out all my makeup with no plastic, all the ones with the little microplastics, and I've gone clean with some of my makeup. So if anybody has questions about clean makeup, hey, we can chit chat about it, because I've been exploring and experimenting. But super excited to talk about today's topic, and we're going to be diving into speech pathology. We're celebrating Speech Pathology Week, which is a time designated to celebrate and promote the field of speech pathology, the hard work and the efforts of those speech pathologists. And it's a time where we raise awareness to really talk about the communication difficulties and the important that for ensuring other individuals and those with those difficulties in communication can also be acknowledged and heard and supported. So welcome. And if you're new to my channel, I'm excited to have you here. I'm on Twitch, I'm on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. Really love streaming every Monday night. And, lately I've been on Instagram making reels, trying something new. I know they changed the algorithm over there. So, you gotta keep up with the times. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, please go over there and connect, follow, whatever. I'm excited to make those silly reels. They're fun. Okay. Let's go ahead and keep moving. I have an amazing guest. I'm always so excited to have these conversations. But first, I do have to say thank you to Restream for powering this episode and every episode that I do lately, because it's my favorite. I can drop a link in the description and in the feed. But thank you to Restream and also Canva for also always helping, because I always use them for making all the visuals for the show. So really excited, and I really appreciate my tools. Important. Okay, so let's go ahead and get ready to go with our new guest for this week. She is a speech language pathologist and life coach. She's got over 25 years, and she's helped thousands of people transition after a stroke, a brain injury, and that stinkin thinkin to the next stage of their lives. She has written 2 books. She's an international best-selling author. We're going to talk about her books. She is a speaker, and she speaks about to businesses, sharing insights about the best brain practices for managing stress, enhancing communication, and improving well-being. She's really passionate about resilience and reinvention. I'm so excited to talk to her. Working on a clear focus on an outcome, measurable progress. She inspires her clients to maximize their strengths and redefine themselves in order to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. So I am so excited to have our guest today, Tsgoyna Tanzman. Welcome.
Hi, DJ. Thank you so much. That's such a great introduction. So I'm really, really excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm honored to have you. I love to do my research on my guests, and you have an amazing background, your experience, and what you've done and brought and shared with this world. So I'm excited to dive into it.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was so interesting, to choose speech pathology, because so many people don't even know what that is. So I thought it was so fascinating the way that we connected and how and when we connected, and choosing this date, August 22nd, is my most recurrent number in my life. So I thought it was completely serendipitous. It was meant to be.
Yes. So let's talk about how we met. I'm going to go give a plug to this Author Advantage Live that I participated in last weekend. We were there. And I already had this topic planned and I didn't have a guest yet. And then you came and I could feel your energy and we chatted for a minute and we just hit it off. So our networking really does pay off, people. Get out there and network. Amazing individuals are out there.
Look at that. Josiah says, hi, all. Yes, it was an amazing
Yes.
event and connection. And just we happened to be in room 3 and started talking about it. And it was just perfect. It was perfect.
So you are a best-selling author. You've got 2 books. And we're going to talk about it because it really talks about your profession with speech pathology as well as trauma, right? Brain injury, and well, which is stroke. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But let's say hi to the chat because I don't want to leave the chat out of it.
Yeah.
Chat, hi. Everyone's here to see you and talk to us. And hi, Juana.
I
How are
was going to say,
you?
hi, Juana. Yes, that's so
Yeah.
nice. Your Saturday
No,
night. All right. All right.
Mackenzie's here. Yeah, that's the best mod ever. So excited. Thank you. Anthony reads from Kidney Trails. Absolutely amazing podcaster, live streamer, has an event that he does as well to really encourage kidney care and kidney coach. So I've had
Just
him as a
listen
guest.
to him. Yeah, he was fantastic. And actually,
Fantastic.
one of my stroke patients also is a recent kidney recipient. Amazing. So she's going
Yeah.
through that process 1 year. 1 year.
Yeah. Amazing all the communities you really find through experiences like this, going to author events or live streaming or just just being out and networking and really meeting people with these stories. So we got to say hi to Josiah. Thank you, Josiah, for being a guest on our show and being a part of that amazing event and being a speaker over there at the Author Advantage with Self-Publishing School. I mean, it's a gift that keeps on giving. I know that's so cliche, but it's so true. If you're not out there really taking advantage of those amazing opportunities, I mean, you're missing out. So participate, get in there. Okay. Hi, Gabe. Thanks for popping over. Thank you for hanging out with us and dropping a comment. All right, Juana. Yeah. Say hi.
Hi,
Say hi.
hi, Juana. So nice to meet you. I've heard
So
you
nice.
chat with DJ before, so it's really nice. Weren't
Oh,
you sick? Was Juana sick? Is she getting
she
better?
was. Yeah.
Yeah,
Look
all
at
right,
you did
girl.
your
All
homework
right, I
too.
did, I did. I loved her comment. It was like something like, "Oh, it was rough," but I'm glad to hear you're better. The body is
Yeah.
resilient. That's one of the real things that I want to share is how resilient it is from, a daily illness or whatever, kind of an illness to
Mhm.
something as significant as a traumatic brain injury. It is incredible to see that. So,
Yeah, to really work with those and spend your life doing that. So go ahead and start sharing with me about your long journey and how it all started and evolved for you, your interest, your passion with speech pathology, and a little bit about what it is from your perspective and what it's.
yeah. So I'll tell you how it got started. It got started by sort of accident, by accident and by coincidence. So it's been more than 25 years now. It's really, I started when I was in college, and I had to make a decision about what my what do you call my major was. I thought I put my phone on silent, but it didn't. Anyway, I had to make a decision about what my major was. Well, right at the same time, my grandmother had had a stroke, and my
Mm.
mom, she lost her ability to communicate. So that particular type of disorder is called aphasia, where you've lost the ability to find words and use words. And there's many different even elements of aphasia. But what happened was she was so frustrated, and my mom was watching the speech therapist work with her, and she knew that I liked people, that I was into communication, that it was something that was interesting. She said, come and just watch her. So I did. I watched her. I thought it was really fascinating. And so I started taking coursework. And the more I took, the more I found it to be fascinating and really discovered how broad the field of speech pathology was. So a lot of times, most people think of speech therapists. The names are interchangeable. Commonly, we say speech pathology is because we really look at diagnosis and treatment of things. But a lot of people know speech pathologists is working with kids who have an S or an R problem, right? And they don't
Mhm.
even realize that. So that happens a lot in the schools, but the field is really huge. I was in particular interested in the brain. The brain fascinates me because it is, whether I'm working with creative visualization or I'm working with a person who's literally had brain damage and figuring out a way to recover, to communicate, to regenerate parts of their body that have been damaged, that neurologists and doctors are saying you will never walk or never talk again because on the MRI, that's what it's showing. But 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years later, we're seeing completely different things. So the field became very, very interesting to me. And in fact, just a little quick side story, and this relates to kind of stinkin thinkin, my own
Yeah.
stinkin thinkin,
Yeah.
right?
Tell us, share.
So when I was in grad school, we had to come up with a thesis topic, right? And so my idea was like, we have two hemispheres of the brain, and it is commonly believed that one hemisphere is controlling, language and linear processing, and every part of the brain is mapped out for a particular function. And the other side of the brain is music and holistic and more motor kinds of things. And but my question was, if there's damage in one area, can another part of the brain pick it up, take it over, compensate for it? Now, you have to understand, I wrote my thesis in the 70s, 1978 or 77 was when I wrote the thesis. And although there had been some discussion earlier, which is, I remember reading a scientific article about neuroplasticity, basically, which is, and I'll tell you about that. But if you think about it this way, it's like Nike really nailed it when they said, just do it, do it, do it, because whatever you do repetitively builds a neural network in your brain, right? And
Yeah.
there's neurogenesis, which is like the new development of brain cells. So in the brain, there's billions of neurons. But what's more important than the billions are the quadrillion connections, the connections. So, like, if connections mean everything. Like, we know that in life, right? Connections mean everything. But there's nothing more true in your brain. So, going back to this thesis idea and my stinking thinking, so I had to find another professor outside of my field of speech pathology. So I went to a psychology professor and I proposed this thought. And this professor said, that is the stupidest idea ever. I mean, maybe he was a
Oh
little
my
more
goodness.
polite, but hardly much
Yeah.
more polite. And I left there feeling completely devastated, like that was the dumbest idea and I should never think anything anymore ever again. And then I just kind of picked myself back up because I still had to find somebody. And I spoke to another professor, same psychology, department. And this guy went, freaking brilliant. That's a great idea.
Okay.
And so I wrote that, at the time, it's got a very fancy name, like when you're in grad school, you want to make it as fancy a name as you can. So it was like equipotentiality of hemisphere function consequent to conditioning in a dichotic listening experiment. But
Wow.
essentially, it was an experiment to prove that there was some carryover. And this, of course, is the field of neuroplasticity now that is so, so big, which is, yes, the brain has all these compensatory strategies that we can borrow, connect, make these different connections. And that's why I can write a book that says Hope After Stroke. And because there is incredible hope after stroke. And yes, it is a tongue twister. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I was very impressed with myself when I needed to feel really smart. It was like, oh man. So funny.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm loving the comments. I mean, Juana says no more stinking thinking. So, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we've all heard that term and we understand what that means. But I
Well,
love
and
your
that's
approach
the
to it.
thing. Yeah. So the stinking thinking is really for like what we do. I say you don't have to have a brain injury to damage your brain. We can do it with our own stinking thinking. And I surely was doing that with mine. And it's like, what are the What are the thoughts you're going to feed yourself? So I see that with all of my clients, whether they're overcoming something majorly catastrophic, or they just have that stinking thinking about their own selves in terms of like,
Mm,
I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, right?
yes. Yeah.
That is a thought we just like something on a plate of food,
It's so
like, I think I'll
hard.
leave that one away. Not eat
Yeah.
that thought. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like what it talks about. You made a reference to behavior. What I would say as our practice, our muscle memory. Some people have referred to muscle memory and really just doing it. And I love that point of just doing it and not like thinking about it. Is that to
Well,
get your
yeah.
memory, get your brain to remember and to real. Okay, so this is a new process. This is a new and build those connections, right? Rebuild the
Right.
connections in a new
Right.
way.
Right. And it does start out from a conscious place
Conscious.
of having to do it, because I don't know if you know about the four sort of steps of learning,
Yes.
but you start out in this unconscious place. And if you think about the time that I always like to talk about driving, right? There was a time in
Hmm.
most of our lives where we didn't even know that we didn't know how to drive, right? It just didn't even occur to us. That's our unconscious incompetence. And then we move up and we start to say, oh, okay, I know that I don't know how to drive, but I'm not really skilled yet. So that's where you sit behind the car and you press the gas pedal and you go flying, right? So you're conscious that you don't know how to drive, but you're still incompetent. And then you
Okay.
move to the place of conscious competence. So that's where you're like, okay, and you talk yourself through it. Like, okay, I know I need to press slowly on the gas. I know I need to put the car in, you know, reverse and then look in my mirror before I start to back up. You have to be conscious
Conscious
and
of
you
the steps.
develop
Yes.
conscious of the steps and you
And
develop some
develop that
competency.
fluidity, right, the confidence,
Correct.
right. Okay.
Right. But then after you've done it so many times, like now, if you're a decent driver, you can talk on the phone, you can put on your makeup. I don't recommend it. Some
Don't do
people
that.
can carve a turkey, right?
Oh my
But you can
goodness.
you can multitask, like you can have a conversation and drive and get to your destination without all that self-talk. And that's called unconscious competence. And so, as we reinstall things in ourselves, even that quote, stinkin thinking, if we
Mhm.
walk around by saying, I'm not good enough, we're going to have some switching over of our own personal self talk, right? And maybe you
Yes.
can't go from I'm not good enough to I'm amazing. Like that's
It's
too big,
yeah,
right?
no, that's not realistic for most of us.
It's not realistic, right? So our brain is totally going to reject it and they're going to go, liar. That is not true. Liar,
Right.
liar. So we have to go for something like some people feel they're worthy. I wonder what
Mhm.
that's like. I wonder what it would be like for me to feel that. To just create a little crack in the possibility. And there's all kinds of ways to do that, but
I
um
love it. This comes up
yeah.
a lot, so I feel like this is really important and so validating for you to share it, and I love to hear it because it really is so important. Even in a book like Atomic Habits, right? Just making those little habits and implementing. We talk about this all the time, consistency, just doing things and the consistency of it. We all understand the process of the learning curve and what it takes to learn something and go through that process that you just now described, which makes so much more sense to me now that I should
Yeah.
have taken better notes. Unconscious thought and conscious, but that
Right.
process, when you break it up that way, it makes so much more sense.
Yes.
And for us, so
And I will tell you why too, because the brain has four basic functions. The first function is to keep you alive. That's a primary thing, right? So it's like this 24-hour virus detection, right? Anything that looks like, smells like, sounds like, reminds us of danger, it's going to match and respond to. And people that have experienced trauma are on that high alert, right? They might be
yes.
triggered by a comment because it is familiar to them as a significant event in their life. So that's the first thing. The brain is always looking to protect you. That's its primary function, to keep you alive. And it's got systems to do that, right? Our breathing is one of those systems. Our heartbeat is one of those systems. It falls under the autonomic system of the body, right? The autonomic nervous system. That's the lower part of the brain. And that's going to run, right? But then the second thing is it wants to avoid pain. It wants to seek pleasure. And this is really critical. It strives for efficiency. So that's why a habit, something that is ingrained, is it's efficient. When we don't have to think of all the steps, it's efficient.
Yes.
When we don't have to argue, when we don't have
Yes.
to overcome decision fatigue, right? Am I going to go to the gym? Not going to go to the gym. Like if the habit is that your sneakers are there, you're going to go to the gym. It's just like a non-negotiable.
Yeah. I love that. Wow, I'm learning so much. I'm taking notes. I'm getting okay. Josiah, thank you for the comment. Practice makes permanent. Look at that. Okay. Okay. I love that. So, and okay, so I'm going to give you a little backstory on me and my dad. My dad was in a car accident when I was in middle school. He had to learn to walk again, talk again, do all those functions, traumatic brain injury, not so much a stroke, but still, and I just remember that is always so key, is that repetition to really like continue for the muscles to remember, having those conversations to really get the brain to can make those connections, right? And I think we hear those in so many different stories of individuals when they play music, or even in Alzheimer's or something like that, where they play music from a long time ago that triggers those memories to stimulate. So am I on the right track?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I did work with stroke patients, but I've also worked a lot with traumatic brain injury. And, this is one of those invisible injuries. And it's very hard for people to really understand, particularly if, and I don't know, in your dad's case, it said that he needed to relearn to speak again as well. But there's some traumatic brain injuries where the person verbal speech sounds okay, like they pronounce their words right, their rhythm and their intonation is okay, but they're experiencing a lot of cognitive changes, processing. That's that higher part of the brain. Processing, judgment, reasoning, planning, all of those kinds of things. And then sensory integration, where there's too much going on for them to sort out. Makes it very difficult for them. And the problem is that it's invisible. We don't see that injury. We notice if a person's got a limp or they've got a cane. We recognize that they may be having a problem, but the expectation for somebody who doesn't sound like they have a brain injury is really demanding. And I hear that so many times from the people that I work with, which is people don't understand me. It is not easy for me. And they also talk about this extreme neurofatigue. And I don't know whether your dad experienced that. It's an unusual level of tiredness. And did he experience anything like that you're aware of?
I don't know. And I'm even trying to go through my own stories I've heard with clients I've worked with through my years of, being an advocate within their disability and trying to find employment. So, and those functioning, right? Like my memory, all those things that they said to me. And so I'm just trying to put the pieces together as you're talking about that difficulty, that fatigue, and how that could feel and how that could be for someone. Or if someone's expressed that to me and maybe I just didn't comprehend it and I didn't understand the concept, but it's so important.
And I think one of the reasons that happens a lot is that they literally are using, right? We talked about efficiency. Your brain uses 20% of your body's calories, right? It's a kind of an energy hog. And so if you understand that as it's trying to process things, it's using even more energy, and it creates this extreme level of fatigue that is not always just relieved by sleep, right? It's not, and so often people are upset with themselves and their families are upset with them too, which seems like you seem lazy, or you seem like you're sleeping, or you're just too tired. And I know that that's a really challenging concern for so many of them that are recovering.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much pressure to be and act and be efficient, and that it can be so disheartening, and it just takes away any little bit of ounce of energy that you work towards. It can just take away. But okay, Josiah's got to go, but thank you for popping by and supporting this
Yeah.
conversation. He
Thanks,
says so
Josiah.
happy that you two connected. Y'all are both awesome. Keep up the good work and keep changing lives. Have a good night. You have
Thank
a great
you.
night
Thank
too.
you
Thank you
too,
so much.
Josiah.
And Jenny made it. So hi Jenny, thanks for popping over. Yes, we're having a great conversation talking about speech pathology, and we're talking to Tsgoyna here today, and we're gonna talk about your book next. Oh god, my camera just didn't focus me. But we're gonna talk about your book. I know. Come on, camera. Let's not do this right now. But I love these topics because I also love the brain. I love behavior. I love thinking, cognitive functioning. This camera's gonna drive me nuts now. Hold on a second. Let's see. Oh gosh, that's terrible. Oh, come on. Okay. Well, we're going to keep going, and I'm going to keep playing with the focusing on this camera, but we're not going to hold this up because
Oh, there you are. You're beautiful
Yay,
now. Look at that.
yay.
You were beautiful before.
Thank you, camera.
I could use a
Thank
little
you.
blur. I could use a little blur.
Touch a blur, please. Not too much. Okay. But so talk about your book and the hope, right? The hope that one finding an ounce of that. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I wrote this book because in the field when I was not starting, I had already been practicing a very, very long time. And of course, I would get very similar questions. People would have experiences that they were suddenly thrust in to, like a crash course in all this medical terminology for starters. Like, what
yes.
just happened? I like to say nobody puts having a stroke on their to-do list, and it really changes your daily activities. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book, it really came to me in a meditation, quite honestly. And it's so funny. I wish Josiah would have actually been here to hear this. I'll have to share it with him. But it came to me in a meditation one time. It's like I was turning 60, and my mother died at 64. My dad died at 68. And as I thought about, like, what could I leave as a legacy? What could I really contribute? And it came to me in a meditation to write this book. But then I argued. I had a little argument with God. I went, okay, listen, if I'm going to write this book, I have to write it on the terms that I want to write it on, because I believe that there's a holistic approach that's not necessarily taking place in the traditional medical community.
Yes, the medical model.
It's just not in the medical model. And like, I'd been practicing that way, but the way I'd have to write my notes for Medicare, I couldn't say something so off the wall as visualization. I mean, it was like, what? That is crazy.
It makes sense though. But yes, you'd have to be careful of how you describe, because certain words would probably just make it feel like it's not within their medical model and treatment.
Correct. Or quote evidence-based then. But even though now that we totally know how evidence-based visualization is. I mean, look at any great Olympian who has been,
oh gosh, all the gurus. Listen.
Yeah.
You've done some work with some gurus. I saw your bio there.
Yeah.
And I listen to Tony Robbins, and they talk about visualization. Every morning I listen to those videos. I share those videos because for me, they're powerful. Now, I will say this. I'm not here tonight. I changed my background for anybody watching that notice. I have a different background, but I have positive affirmations, and I believe in the power of the positive affirmations and really like taking the time, meditating and internal, right? Like taking that time to harness that energy. So I support that, and I love that is becoming that much more acceptable now.
Well, I mean, it's like if we go to the greatest Olympians, right? And if you see
Yeah.
people that have had skiing accidents, for example, and then they can't practice, but they spend all of this time with electrodes on them, visualizing going through the jumps, the moves, the whatever,
Mhm.
and they measure their muscle memory. They might, it's like all scientifically proven, right? But so going back to this argument that I had with God, it's like, if I'm going to write this book, I'm going to write it in the way I want to write it. And so I wanted to make sure that, number one, people felt smart and empowered. Like when they pick up this book, they've been thrust into this situation. They don't understand who's involved. They're emotionally distraught. There's language coming at them. There are decisions to be made. They can't even have a conversation that's meaningful with their doctors because they lack the language. I think of it like if I talk to, if I want to get my website built, like I
Mhm.
don't know the language to say to my web person, how do I do this, right? So
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wanted to make sure that this was done in a very simplistic way, which started not dumbed down, but simplistic, like part one, what happened, life in the hospital, and all of that information. What's next, homecoming. And then finally, what now, making it work when everyone leaves. Because those are the three typical big chunks of time. And then all within that. And, I wanted to go places that nobody went. Nobody talks about sex. All of a sudden, you're a person, you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, I don't care. But all of a
Yeah.
sudden, you're not having sex. And like, nobody wants to talk about that.
Right, right.
So, not that I'm the expert, but I went and spoke to experts about it because it's like that part of your life is over. Well, why? Why is that part over? So, I wanted to go into place that people wanted to ask questions and nobody was asking. And
Mm.
I have so many amazing stories of my patients that showed me how resilient, why there's hope, what they could do. When I even looked at it and said, I'm going to take you on this journey, but it's your journey. I'm just going to guide you. It's like the Sherpa, right? You've got to climb Mount Everest, but I'll be there to support you. So that's why I wrote this book.
Okay, so as you talk, I'm listening to your voice, and I mentioned this before we got started, was that you self-narrated your book. It's available on Amazon, so we're at the 33-minute mark, and I got a couple things I want to say. Number one, Gabe, because you're still here, and I saw your comment to Kenny D. Kenny D, I didn't see your comment, so if you're here, drop a comment for me, and I'm going to try to give you a shout out. But Gabe, did you hear that? She talked about legacy, and Gabe on his show, he's notorious for asking his guests about the legacy that they want to leave. So I'm glad you touched on that. And Gabe, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat for her because I know that is your expertise. But I just think that was like wonderful. So since we're at the 30-minute mark, I'm going to go ahead and show a post your book while we're talking about it.
Okay.
Here we go. Hope After Stroke. It's available on Amazon in multiple formats, which I absolutely love. You can get it on Kindle, you can get it hard, you can get it softback, and you have
audio.
and audio, yes, which
Yeah.
do self-narrate, and it has over 250 reviews. It is a bestseller, so go out there and pick up this book, The Holistic Guide, right? To getting your life
Yeah.
back. I love that for caregivers and
Yep.
survivors.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. That was the other thing. Like people started saying, well, who are you writing the book for? Is it for caregivers or survivors? Like it had to be this either or. And I kept saying, it's for both because and it's so funny because back then I wasn't that convinced about it, but I kept saying it. And now it's like, yeah, it's for both because in the beginning, if you do have a caregiver, the caregiver is going to lead. You are not in a capacity to lead. But ideally what happens is that as you recover, the survivor starts to take over more of the independence of it. That's the whole idea, is to get there and to transition those roles. And you know, it's well, and because the caregiver does so much, I ended up doing another book, and that was the 12-week recovery journal or essential guide and workbook for caregivers. And this is because caregivers need to give themselves care first. And it is a tough job being a caregiver. Was when your father had his injury, who was caring for him? Who was the primary caregiver?
My stepmom, his
Mm-hmm.
wife. Yeah, my stepmom
Mm-hmm.
was taking care of him. And he was going to therapy, all kinds of therapy. So I just remember that she wasn't working and she really had to be home to provide care for him and watch him. And it was, I mean, I was young, so I can't really remember the length of time, but I just remember it was really stressful. And a lot of the things you're saying really so for one primary example of what I remember I was explained to was he had all these memories, but it's like when you drop a deck of cards and you pick up all the cards and they're not in any order, but they're all there. There's just no idea of what came first, before or after. So things like that he may remember an event, but he may not remember when it happened or who was there. So there's pieces missing, right? The brain fog. So I remember that's been really hard, the emotional changes, the behavioral, the personality change. So this is something I love to talk about. And this is kind of personal, but I'll say it anyways. I'll share it just for, a good host kind of
Right.
story. But,
Right.
my dad used to be an entertainer, right? And I always said, like, he
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be a soap opera star. And it was so cute. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
goodness. It's thunder and lightning. I don't know if anybody heard that, but
I heard that. Yeah.
yeah. So he wanted to be an entertainer, and part of me wonders I didn't get to see that comedian in him because of his car accident.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of took a lot of his personality away. Right? He had a lot of aggression, which he never tended to be an aggressive person, but with
Mm-hmm.
the emotional like inconsistencies, I don't really know how to explain it, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
being able to manage your cognitive thinking, getting frustrated
Mm-hmm.
because you can't find the word. You said aphasia, and I don't know that really
Aphasia. Uh-huh.
aphasia. But I know Bruce
Mhm.
Willis, right? That was very prominent just not that long ago when he came
Right.
openly about his diagnosis with that. So I know that that's been out there kind of publicly lately. But yeah, like how difficult it is to find the word, the frustration you feel. People don't understand you. They don't give you the time. They get frustrated if you're not efficient in your communication.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is
And
a
there's so
conversation.
many components about that. So, what Bruce Willis has is something called a primary progressive aphasia. So it's a
Mm,
slower, longer period of time. What your dad experienced was a traumatic onset.
mhm.
And yeah, your description of the cards was perfect. I talk in my book about like a filing cabinet coming in, like a
Yeah.
gigantic, crane emptying all this stuff, and the stuff is there. So aphasia, your intellect is not impaired, but your ability to express yourself is. And it may
Mhm,
be that you can't find single words. It may be that you can't put together whole sentences. It may
mhm,
interfere or interrupt your ability to read, to use gestures. People would say, well, then just use gestures. Well, all of these communication systems are impaired in some degree. Reading, writing, gesturing, speaking, those are part of them. Then
mhm,
I don't know if your dad had any of this experience, but the actual motor component of slurring your speech, right, which makes you
mhm,
sound drunk. So those people that might be able to drive and might have the cognitive capacity, if they get pulled over and they sound drunk, they can be misinterpreted, right? They can end up in jail. There's so many different components of just the speech part that takes place, or the communication impairment with an injury. That does make it very challenging. And yes, somebody asked if I've seen
oh,
cognitive
Jenny.
losses with COVID, and people have complained about that, right? Attention focus can be one. You hear a lot about brain function, brain fog as a symptom of long
Mhm.
haulers. So,
Yeah, even something with a concussion. When I was in a car accident, I had a concussion, and that brain fog frustrated me because I could not find the word. I could not just
mhm,
grasp what I wanted to internally share
mhm,
externally. And I
yeah,
wasn't able to make the connection on the next thought. And it was
yeah,
for me, who's a fast speaker, a fast thinker, to feel this kind of like difficulty
yeah,
in finding those words was so scared. And I remember sharing with my doctor, like, is this gonna this is gonna subside, right? Like, I'm gonna get my brain back. But I mean,
yeah.
it was so scary, and you just don't
It is.
know. Oof.
It is. And then, of course, when we add this layer of
Mm,
fear and disappointment and sadness onto it, it
grief.
exacerbates it. Grief, all of those things need to be processed because that does not create the conditions for easy thoughts to be coming
Yeah.
out, right? Any kind of added pressure, urgent situations where you have to respond in a certain amount of time, as quote, something as simple as ordering coffee at Starbucks. If you want a
Yeah.
latte that's a venti latte with I mean, there are like 20 different qualifying adjectives. You get up there and like the pressure, right, to say something um,
And
can
fast,
be
right? Because there's somebody behind you,
right.
and then there's the
Yeah.
cashier
Right.
and all these things, and then maybe the music and all the colors and
Correct.
all these external sensory
Exactly.
that we're trying to
Exactly.
take in. I know, because it happens to me,
Exactly.
like, that overwhelmness.
The
Yeah.
overwhelming part, and so that makes it even harder. So, there are so many things that we learn about managing or conserving energy or utilizing our energy in certain conditions to modify some of the conditions, but also modifying those internal conditions, getting out ahead of it. I really stress like a practice of focus and internal meditation. And they've there's lots of studies right now that are proving how meditation is helpful to people with aphasia, to people with brain injuries, for focus and for memory.
I
um,
love
and
that.
so yeah,
I did not know that, but I love how science is really being able to finally capture the importance of that and how that works and on a deeper level. Um,
yeah. And when the Mayo Clinic starts talking about meditation, it's like, hello, yeah, welcome, welcome to the world. I know it took you a while to figure it out, but all right,
yeah.
now that you've mentioned it, it's everybody's on board.
Yeah. Okay. We're going into 43 minutes. Let's talk about your other book because I know you have a second book, and I want to make sure that we give credit to this one. This one seems like something that might help me a little bit, but let's just talk about it. Yeah. Just decide.
Just decide fail-proof strategies to up-level your life,
Yes.
career, and relationships. And it's so much about decisions, right? The decisions that
Mhm.
we fail to make, the cost of indecision, the things that we leave that are open loops, right? Open loops create a lot of stress for us. And it doesn't mean that we want to have impulsive decisions. We want to make good decisions. But so often we get into this analysis paralysis. And it's so funny because some of my smartest clients, like attorney type of a clients, who are really good at doing the research and looking at the pros and the cons and looking at it from every angle, it's kind of like just a little bit of a buffed up version of indecision or procrastination. And and um, we find that making a decision and moving forward, we always know the next step, right? Those
Yeah.
decisions, we find out what the next step is. But when we're stuck in that paralysis state, um, we utilize our vital energy, we drain our vital energy, and we end up regretting things. We feel disempowered. We don't learn to trust ourselves. Um, and we suffer from decision fatigue, right? So there comes a point of the day where, I think happy hour was named happy hour for a certain reason, right? Because by the time you're at 5 o'clock, you've made thousands of
Yes.
decisions.
Yes.
You've made thousands of decisions, whether from simplest ones to big ones. And we don't want to think anymore. We just want to turn our brains off. And so there is strategies of deciding in advance. We talked about like going to the gym, right? When we put our sneakers in front of the door, or we already have our gym bag packed, so that we don't suffer from that decision fatigue.
That extra step that yes, I've heard of this and I've read on this here and there, this kind of method. And I think it really does help preserve your brain power. I believe it.
100%.
I believe in automation. Listen, anybody that listens to me, it's like, how can I automate this? Let me find the best way to automate this. And I'm going to say that I may feel I have a little ADHD and I'm waiting for a diagnosis there, but your brain is on overload with thoughts and information and just trying to process and sort and organize and just shuffle through so much so fast. So I know
100%,
for
right? We
me,
have.
decision, I have to make 50 before, 100 before to make the one. And it can take me weeks because of the indecisiveness or trying to do the research or trying to figure out and gather. And so there's just
Well,
so
and
much.
so much of that comes from like, what if I make the wrong decision? The fear of making the
Sure.
wrong decision. And that's,
Yeah. Wanting to be efficient.
wanting to be efficient. And I like to say that sort of the place where you get to the decision part, that's the actual action. But it's the
Yeah.
thoughts and the feelings that are the fuel that create the actual actions, which give us our results. And that's really important when we're making a decision based out of fear. Probably not the best place to do it from, right? We can be uncertain, but we can also be determined, right? We can create a thought, and our thoughts, we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. That's how many thoughts we have. And trust me, they're not all like Mother Teresa worthy. I know they aren't for me, right?
No.
They're not. And so we have to like be able to listen to those and go, all right, is that a thought that I even want to think? Does that thought influence how I'm feeling right now and this decision? Confusion.
And that goes a lot into the hope, right? This feeds a lot into getting that hope, keeping that hope, maintaining and preserving to move forward, to continue to get through.
Yeah. I mean, whenever we're trying to achieve something that's bigger than us, somebody was talking about imposter syndrome. And I say, really, like, if you're growing, you're kind of always going to have it because you're always moving into the next level, which is like,
Good to know.
I'm not quite there yet. So yeah, the clothes are a little big for me. The shoes are a little bit big for me, but I'm determined to get there. I'm committed to do this. And sometimes we can even take action when we hear that voice, and we might say, it's like taking noisy kids in the car with you, right? I don't know if you have kids, but when they go, I don't want to go there, it's like, I know that. I hear you. Thank you for sharing. Buckle up. We're out. We're going out the door.
Oh, yes. So true. So true. I just want to say real quick to Jenny, because she made a comment here. Let me see. Jenny says, I have friends in the military who have issues with brain issues from being around the front lines of the bombs. There are a lot of studies on the brains of veterans. So thank you, Jenny.
100%.
I'm a veteran, and I love that you bring awareness to our veterans also as well that have a different set of what is the word? Like they're exposed to different things being in the military, and they have to deal with the Veterans Administration. So I know that, but thank you for bringing, because it's so important.
I want to share something really, really wonderful about that. This is one of the people that I train with. His name is Dawson Church, Dr. Dawson Church. And he did, I don't know if you're familiar with what EFT is, emotional freedom technique, and tapping. It's known as tapping.
Oh, like the
yes,
on the arms right here.
and these acupressure points. So it's
Yeah.
essentially utilizing acupressure points along with cognitive behavioral therapy. But he did unbelievable work with veterans who had suffered from PTSD and depression, and who had tried regular cognitive therapy, had tried medication. Those things hadn't worked for them at all. His studies were phenomenal. You should really look up. His name is Dawson Church, and
Right.
EFT. The work he did with veterans was, in fact, they ended up. I might misspeak about the actual study, but they used 3 different groups, and one was just traditional cognitive therapy, one was just medication, and one was this tapping group. And what they measured, so they actually measured the level of cortisol in the mouth. Cortisol is a stress hormone.
Yeah.
Cortisol is something that we all have, and we need cortisol. Cortisol wakes us up in the morning. Cortisol is the thing that if we're walking across the street and a bus is coming at us, we want to activate the fear response to flee, right? So it activates the fear, freeze, flight, or
Right. Fight or flight, I've
freeze.
heard.
Fight or
Yeah.
flight. Thank you.
Freeze.
Fight or flight
Yeah.
response. Exactly. So cortisol is like the main hormone that starts the whole process, and it actually triggers like 1,400 different hormones in your body. So they measured the level of cortisol. Now, cortisol is great for activating it as you need it, but having a chronic level of, that's your sympathetic system, which I'd call the stress system. On the other side is the peace or the parasympathetic. When the chronic stress is elevated, it is taking away brain function, it's depressing immunity, physical thing, it's depressing digestion, it's depressing many different functions chronically that lead to depression. So they measured the level of cortisol in their mouths, in their saliva. They actually sent the results back 3 times because they could not believe the reduction in cortisol was so statistically significant. They thought something was in error. So it was a phenomenal study. The work
Wow.
with veterans is absolutely amazing. You should really look it up. It's Boston Church. I forget exactly the name of the thing, but if you look it up, veterans and
Yeah.
EFT tapping, phenomenal
Wow.
work. Yeah.
It sounds
Yeah.
to me similar. So when I was a caseworker and I worked with kids in the system, right? Abuse, neglect. That's kind of like kids that have are in that hyper state or hypo state of fear, right? Like
Yeah. Right.
because of
Chronically
their
activated stress response.
yeah, and how that affects their mental health, their psychological
100%.
development, and all that into adulthood. So I've heard of that because of working in that field for so long, and understanding like how that the cortisol and your stress and living in a high stress, how it affects those abilities to function and emotionally regulate and whatnot.
Absolutely. I actually talk about it in here because I did train with Dawson Church and have used EFT techniques with some of my patients. And they've had amazing results. Could I share a little quick story?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay. So one was a woman. She was a postal worker, and she was walking the beat, and she wasn't feeling well. So she stopped into this one place and asked them to call 911. She said, like, can you call 911? By the time 911 arrived, she was having a full-on seizure. So she woke up in the hospital. She was by herself. And when I met her after she had some surgery. And I'll go back to the beginning of the story because it's really fascinating. When I talk to her, I always say, like, what medicines are you taking? And tell me all the things. And so she told me what medicine she was taking. But then her sister came and she said she's taking Xanax and Ativan. She never had panic attacks. But now, since she's been home every day, right about 5 o'clock, she has a panic attack. And she never had them before. So I asked her if she was willing to kind of just explore it by using some of these EFT techniques. And it looks a little strange. It looks a little weird, but it's like, even though, and you just do this setup statement, and what happens is you allow your subconscious or your conscious thinking to be bypassed. You move into a different sort of mental state as you move and talk about these things. And as we start, even though I have these panic attacks, even though
where can we do
this
it?
is your
Where can we
karate chop
practice? Right
point.
here. Okay, we'll
You
just
practice
do it
right here. But I'll just
Okay.
say, even though I've had these panic attacks and I don't know where they come from, I still love and accept myself, and I'm open to understanding. And we say that 3 times, and then we go through the spots. And I went, this panic attack, this panic attack. And as we started to tap through it, she said, I remember, and she just talked about waking up in the hospital. And I tapped with her. She said, woke up in the hospital and I was by myself. The doctor was at the end of the bed. And the doctor said, I'm glad you're awake. We found out you have a tumor. We don't know whether it's benign or malignant, but we'll take some tests and I'll be back. And then he left. Right? That's like, okay, that's kind of heavy, right? And she said, I was alone. So we tapped about being alone. So tell me about being alone. What do you notice? And she said, oh my God, I hear this noise. And I said, what's the sound? And she said, tick, tick, tick. I said, what do you think it is? And she said, it's a clock. I said, tell me what time it is. She said, 5 o'clock. And she burst into tears. And she realized that she had made this significant event at that moment, but she had never connected it. And she just allowed herself to experience that in that moment. Now, she still needed to recover. She still had physical things to recover from, but she wasn't having that panic attack anymore at 5 o'clock that was preventing and overlaying. It was just incredible. That was a one and done thing. It was amazing. Yeah.
Wow. I
It
love
was
those
really powerful.
stories
Yeah, it
of
was powerful.
breakthrough
Yeah.
when you come into that.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was really something. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I love
Yeah.
knowing about the possibilities, what's possible out there, to not quit, to not give up, to surround yourself with whoever you can to find that support. Real quick, because caregivers, when we talk about support,
Yeah.
caregivers, a support month is in November. I know that we honor a lot of caregivers and what they do for individuals with different abilities and needs. So I just feel like that is always so important to acknowledge the caregiver role, and the multiple roles they carry, because it's not just one role. A caregiver is all the things, lots of things, and they're just one person. And normally they're the closest person, right, to the person with the special need, or
Right.
the illness and
Right.
whatnot. So gotta give so much consideration and support to, and acknowledge what they go through. And
You have to. And
yeah,
they have to take care of themselves, because they cannot operate from an empty tank, and they are
no,
giving doubly, right? They're giving to their partner or their child, but they have to take care of themselves as
yeah.
well. And their life doesn't stop, and all the stuff that goes with that. That's one of the things, like, just part of this journal is the daily journal, which
Oh, I
is
love that. It's like action focus activities. You can write in it. There's prompts.
100%. 100% and quick, because they don't have time, right?
Yeah,
The first question I want to say to them is, how do you feel today? What's your energy like? What's your emotional state? What's your energy like?
to get them
And
to
what
connect with themselves, right?
100%, because they have to give to themselves before they go out. They have to fuel themselves first. That's the most important thing. And you cannot give from an empty tank. You just can't. So I asked them, what do or can I appreciate today? What can it be? I mean, it might be as simple as, I like to say this, when you bake anything, the very first thing you have to do is turn on the oven and preheat that oven. And that's what it's like for this. You're preheating that oven. What can I tune myself to and focus on appreciation? There's some others, but it looked like you wanted to say something.
No, well, we're wrapping up. So
Okay.
I want to
Okay.
make sure people can connect with you, why they should connect with you, reach out to you. Go out there, get this book. It could be a great gift. It could be such a great tool or resource for someone that may seem like they're in the situation that we've kind of talked about. So just please consider getting her book and getting it a Kindle, and reaching out to you, right? You do life
Yes,
coaching, so
I
there's an
do. I do. I
yeah.
But
I
I
would
also
love
want to say this too, as something that
yeah.
I want to make sure that people leave. 80% of strokes are preventable. That's number one. 80%. And we can manage our blood pressure and our blood sugar. Those are most important things for the stroke. But I'm going to tell you
Oh,
how to recognize the signs of a stroke. Okay. The
okay.
acronym FAST, you've probably heard of the acronym
Fast.
FAST. It stands
Okay.
for face. So we want to look for asymmetry of the face, right? Sometimes there's a drooping on one side of the face.
Face.
The
Okay.
A, right? A stands for arms. You ask somebody to put both their arms up because, again, you want to look for asymmetry. Typically,
Okay.
the stroke affects one side of the brain and you'll
Right.
see a drooping, right?
Mhm.
S stands for speech. Ask them to, tell you their name and address. Sometimes their speech will be garbled or they won't be able to remember something.
Mm.
T stands for time. Time is the most critical thing. I said 80% of strokes are preventable. Time is necessary because in the first 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours, most strokes are blockage. There are two kinds of strokes. One is a blockage of the brain. That's called an ischemic stroke. There's a block, right? The other is a bleed when you have an aneurysm. The
Right.
bleed is more dangerous. People tend to die more from those. But the block stroke, if you get treatment within the first 2.5 to 3 hours, they can administer a drug that can reverse the symptoms and halt the
Oh.
stroke. If they can't use the drug, they can do a surgical procedure to remove the clot. But for every minute that's lost in time, you lose close to 2 billion brain cells. So, time is the most important thing. Call 911. If they can do, if they don't transport you, they don't charge you. I always say to people, it's better to die of embarrassment than to die of a stroke, right?
Oof.
Um, you 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 just have to be able to make sure that that time factor is so critical. Don't be one of those that said, if I only would have called, right? People
Mm.
say all the time, I thought it was indigestion. I thought it was kind of weird. I thought maybe I drank some too much. Um, just get yourself checked.
Wow.
Make sure you get checked because you can prevent the disability of a stroke. Stroke is the third leading cause of disability, long-term disability. And that is a devastating thing. Sometimes people say, what's worse than dying from a stroke? And it may be this long-term disability, particularly if you're a primary provider for your family. So there's so much hope. Make sure you look for those symptoms if you're noticing it in somebody else and get help right away.
Wow, powerful, so important. Thank you for sharing that. I think
Mm.
that that is just a great takeaway here as we wrap up. Thank you so much. I could keep talking to you. I feel like this conversation is just so invaluable. I have so many comments to say, and I'm trying to just not continue the
Yeah.
conversation, but really kind
But
of
people,
wrap it up and bring it in. People do need
well,
to know. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, and people can definitely get in touch with me. I'm happy to, support them and answer any questions they might have, whether it's in the stroke-related world or the coaching, which is, dealing with our own stinking thinking to get from maybe a good life to an awesome life. I'd love to
Mhm.
talk to you about all those options.
All right, great. Well, thank
Hi,
you.
Wendy. Yeah.
Oh, did we get somebody popping in? Oh, Wendy must have stopped by. Okay. I didn't see Wendy's comment, but Jenny, thank you. I appreciate all your comments when you came in. Many tests out there for PTSD with veterans in Colorado because she's in Colorado. Jenny
Yeah.
said that there's apps out there. There are apps that you can do the tapping at certain times of the day. So I love
Yeah.
that, Jenny. Thank you
Yeah,
for
the
sharing that.
tapping solution is fantastic. They did some great work and they offer some great tools online for that. They're very generous with resources too. So
Wonderful. Okay. Wow. Well, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up and just appreciate you bunch of sharing all the wealth of information and knowledge and years of experience, and just meeting you has been so absolutely enlightening, and just honored to have you as a guest. Oh, thank you,
Thank
everyone. Everyone's
you.
saying
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much,
No,
Jenny and Gabe.
Kenny.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Saturday night, Mackenzie. Thank you for listening in and participating. We had some other people come in earlier. Kenny D came by. Josiah came by. Let's see, Juana. Thank you, Aunt that came by. Just everyone, and then whoever catches the replay, please reach out to our wonderful guest, and she spent our time here sharing all this amazing knowledge. So all right, we're gonna go ahead
Thank
and
you
play our
so
little
much.
outro, and gonna wave. All right, thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.